Your lead.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Naptime Nutrition. I'm Yafi Lavova, registered dietitian and owner of Baby Bloom Nutrition. And with me today is the fabulous Atara Fenig of Toronto. And we're talking today about when the pursuit of a healthy diet is too much. Thank you so much for joining me, Atara. It's really fun to do this together.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to cut the crawler there. Okay, so first, let's talk about what health is, because I think people don't really understand how to define health. We tend to run to the scale, and obviously as non-diet dietitians, you and I are both not in favor of the scale determining health. So how do you define health?
Yeah, so when I think of health, I like to see healthy as something more than just a weight on a scale, the exact foods that we put in our body, and introduce people to the concepts of satisfaction, flexibility, variety, balance, health as a more subjective understanding. So what feels healthy for us as individuals through our own lived experience and through knowing how certain foods feel in our body and work for us and give us energy. And of course, taking a more holistic view of health beyond just physical health to include emotional health as well. So how is our food behaviors, our eating behaviors, our food rules, how is that influencing our feelings, our thoughts, our level of anxiety, and really redefining health to include emotional wellness as well.
I think that's great. And when we talk about health, we talk about mood and sleep. How are you sleeping? A lot of times, if you don't have a diet that's appropriate, a nutrition plan that's appropriate for your individual constitution, you don't sleep well. You don't have good moods. You don't have positive personal interactions. And we can also look at lab values. And a lot of this is subjective, but we have objective as well. We have inflammation markers, blood sugar control, different ways to look at health. And I think it's important to look at that whole picture. And when people think that this is really, like, a lot of times this comes across as vague. We're all humans. Why aren't we processing the things the same? But if you think about it, we all have different allergies. One person has oily skin and one person has dry skin. One person has curly hair and one person is bald. And, we all have so many different ways that we're different on a basic physical level.
Right.
So why would the way that we handle nutrition be any different?
Exactly.
So it's interesting to look at it that way. And so nutrition is not a checklist, right? We have macro and micronutrients, and we don't know everything. I've talked about this a lot, about how if you look, I love the example of what formula looked like, baby formula in the 1920s and the 40s, and how it was the perfect imitation of breast milk. And yet we've come so far now because we learned a lot more, and the formula that's on the market now is very much different than it was back then. So who's to say that in the next 50 years, we're not going to learn a ton of information that's going to change how we view nutrition? So looking at what we know now and putting it in a checklist is really not effective, because we can't assume that we know everything.
Right. And when it comes to nutrition, it's so much greater than the sum of its parts. There's so much synergy between, there's synergy in nutrition from balanced nutrition overall. So it doesn't have to be this food is good, this food is bad. There's certain patterns of eating that are attributed to health, and looking at it as a whole and how this affects our physical health and our mental and emotional health as well.
That's a really good point. And we also have to remember that our mental and emotional health and our social health is very important, and we can't prioritize the physical over the rest of it. If you classify pizza and cake as a bad thing, then taking your child to another kid's birthday party is going to be very difficult, because that's what's generally served. And it's important for your child's mental and social health to be able to participate with other kids.
Right.
And so it's important to look at it as a whole package, the way you're saying. So then there's the idea of purity, that we chase purity. And before starting the broadcast, we discussed what that purity is, because it can take different forms. It can be nutritional purity or even religious purity that we look for more strongly in our kids than in ourselves. And it can really go down kind of a rabbit hole.
Definitely. So it's kind of like this idea of magical thinking, where we think that certain foods or certain food combinations will lead to like perfect health or this super, right? And really, there's no such thing as this level of purity, or what I call human health.
Mhm.
Definitely, it's not going to come from a specific food or way of eating.
Right. And the very pursuit of that idea is stressful, and stress in and of itself is inflammatory and can lead to disease states.
Definitely.
So when you find yourself in a situation where you're in a search for purity and you're not living on, some kind of hippie commune that like where you actually have regular access and you're surrounded by people who live the same lifestyle, like it's like a pie in the sky idea. It's this level of purity doesn't really exist, and the pursuit of it is a detriment in and of itself. So exactly. It's important. I have a blog called The Hot Dog Conundrum, where you as a parent take your child out and you get whatever sounds good to you, whatever tastes good to you, and you choose for them something that's going to fit this idea of purity. So you're eating a hot dog and fries, and they're having hummus and veggies, and the truth is that there's a place for everything. And so you can share both of that. You can enjoy different foods at the same time or separately.
Exactly. And I was mentioning to you, I work a lot with pregnant women, and this idea of like this double standard almost starts with women during pregnancy. And there's a lot of anxiety about their food choices during pregnancy and what they're putting in the body for the baby. And this is so widespread in our culture. I'm on these mom groups, and they're calling foods poisonous, and they're calling I don't know if you're familiar with there's blood sugar testing during pregnancy where we have to drink a sugary drink, and they're referring to these drinks as poison. But these are really drinks that are going to help diagnose important medical conditions that are important to manage during pregnancy. So kind of taking away that black and white thinking around I can't put this poison into my body really helps achieve overall health and make sure we don't miss important diagnoses.
Right. It's one thing to say you don't like the taste of that drink. Plenty of people don't like the taste of the drink, and you can look up all kinds of ways to tolerate it better. It tastes better if it's frozen, or it's really cold. It tastes better this way or that way. But that's really focused on the taste. Hey, quit it. I have a distraction here. You want me? Oh. my nursing trick doesn't work with him at this age. So it's one thing to work with that drink as far as you need it for the diagnosis. Here's a way to make the test more pleasant. But it's an entirely different way to look at it to say, come here. It's a different way to look at it to say this is poison. And the truth is that during pregnancy or onward, seeing any food as poison is it's difficult. It's black and white thinking that doesn't really serve you, because anything that's black and white is always going to have some kind of fallacy. Yeah.
There we go. Now he's quiet.
It's the mute button. So it's very important to do that test, and it's important to not see it as poison, because you shouldn't feel guilty about such an important test that, as you said, provides a very important diagnosis or valuable information that there is no diagnosis.
Right.
But I remember when I found out I was pregnant with twins, I ran my first thing, even as a dietitian, I completely lost my mind and looked up the amount of grams of protein I need per day. And I went and got protein powder. And it might still be in my garage, never having been opened, because I'm not a big fan of protein powder myself. But it's just the idea that even as a professional dealing in this field, we're all affected by this idea of wanting to provide something better for our kids and wanting to provide them the best. And that's why it's even more important to realize that protecting their mental and their social health and their relationship with food is just as important as them eating a piece of spinach. It's not, we can't prioritize one over the other.
Right, yeah.
So you brought up the risks. So what are the risks of having a pure or a very clean diet? because it's applauded in our society, as you mentioned, it's normalized.
Exactly. So there's complications both physically and when it comes to our mental health. So physically, we can see malnutrition from avoiding in food groups, avoiding specific nutrients. We see digestive issues. We can see lack of menses, lack of fertility, which is a reason that some women come to me. We can see unable to maintain a healthy weight just as a byproduct of following strict food rules, even when it's not the intention. And then of when weight management is not necessarily in the intention. So malnutrition as a whole is a big risk. And then as well, we have the emotional and mental health piece. So can cause a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety. It can be socially isolating to say, hey, I can't eat out at that restaurant with those friends, or I can't go to eat at that party, because we connect over food. And to remove ourselves from that connection because that food may or may not fit our food rules can be very socially isolating for ourselves and also for our kids, right? How we let our kids interact with other kids through food, as well as constant. Again, back to the mental health would be constant food thoughts and rules leave less room for more meaningful life pursuits. And that is taking away from wellness, wellness in general. Yes.
Yeah, it takes a valuable mental real estate, spending all of that time on food. And the truth is that we are important to our friends and to our families and to our communities, and spending that much time considering food rules and creating boundaries for ourselves that are a bit arbitrary, they don't work towards our social and emotional health and our connection to our families and communities. It can be very isolating, and as well have the physical problems that you mentioned. We have a comment from Rosema, a friend of mine who's currently in New Zealand and pregnant with her second. She says, haha, I just did that test yesterday without a second thought. Well, awesome, because you've been hanging out with me too much.
Well, I happen to like the drink. I'm one of those weird people who love that sugary orange drink. It reminds me of Orange Crush from my childhood.
Me too. So, I liked it too. I thought it was weird.
No, I like it. Yeah, it's good stuff. But I can understand why some would not like that.
I understand it too. It is really, really sweet. And I generally don't even like really sweet drinks, but I just didn't have an issue with that drink. So Rosema, in New Zealand, what flavor did you have? Hopefully you'll get to comment. So it's really important. We also discussed before, elimination of certain problem foods, quote unquote, it can be really, you can be falling into a fallacy. So a good example of that is sodium. We always hear how you should cut your salt, and you should cut your salt because salt is bad for you and it leads to X, Y, and Z, whatever. Other one? It leads to X, Y, and Z. But the truth is that when you are, if you're in a situation where you're making all of your food from scratch and you completely eliminate sodium, you could be at risk for not only decreased sodium, which you need for very important processes in the body, but also you could also be at risk for iodine deficiency if, depending on what's present in the rest of your nutrition. So something that's seen as bad, it's actually necessary in our diet. And when you hear cut your sodium, decrease your salt, it's assuming that you're eating pizza every so often, or a bag of chips, or even like everything has some amount of sodium in it, but that advice is really assuming that you're following kind of a standard North American kind of diet.
Right. And sometimes the message is the wrong person. It's like the person who kind of needs to hear that message is not listening. And the ones who have moderate amounts of sodium in their diet to begin with, we're like, oh, maybe we should cut it further. And understanding that nutrition is not one size fits all is very important when it comes to this.
I think that's so important for people to know that something that works for one person doesn't work for everybody. And, like I was a vegetarian before the end of my pregnancy with the twins, and I ended up getting iron infusions. And I fully support other people who healthfully follow a vegetarian diet. It didn't work for me. It didn't work for my body. And that was difficult for me. But it's important to know that if you're doing something that isn't working for your body, that's working for someone else's, your body's different and you react to things differently. And so it's a really good point. It's important to know that. And Rosemma did get back to us with a flavor. It was clear, not so much flavor, just sweet. I'm a hummingbird, so I liked it. And I noticed that you put the U in flavor. So I guess them Kiwis are getting to you.
We also spell.
Right, it's hard. Yeah, you're from Toronto. You're Canadian. You use the U. But historically, Rosemma didn't use the U. So I think that's funny to note. Not at all having anything to do with nutrition. So it's just to sum up our points. It's very important to recognize that nutrition is individual, and that it's important to have healthy social interactions. And a lot of times that Kiwi autocorrect, so she's not actually using you. It's important to know what's good for your body and what's working for your body and your family, and to go with that. And it's important to not have this stressful pursuit of purity for yourself or for your family.
Right. So if I can add, I think that was so well said, Yafi. And if I can add one more thing, it would be like, so what's the difference between a kind of a strict food rule versus a healthy food value? Like, we do value healthy foods as part of our lifestyle. So if I had to sum it up, I would say food rules look anxious, they're absolute, and they're like always or never, very black and white, and cause a lot of anxiety. And food values can definitely generally be more flexible, more general. In general, I like to have more veggies with my meals, and they can feel empowering. So it would be the difference between when I have, let's say, a statement like, when I have a snack before bed, I feel better, versus I can't eat after 7 o'clock, or something very rigid versus something that's more personal and more general and flexible.
Right. And the thing is, to build on that, your plate may look the same, whether you have appropriate relationship with food, a positive relationship with food, or if you're following this intense pursuit of purity, your plate might look exactly the same. It's the intention behind it. If you're having a big salad because you feel like you should, because you have to, because you haven't had X number of antioxidants that day, that's not a pleasant relationship with food. And you're eating that salad, but you're resenting it. Whereas if you're eating the salad because something refreshing and crunchy sounded really delicious, that's a positive relationship with food. And your plate looks exactly the same, but it doesn't include that resentment and that stress.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So we are very open for comments. This is going to be posted on Baby Blue Nutrition at the normal nap time nutrition time tomorrow, but I could not pass up the opportunity to interview Atara. So we're doing a little different today. So I'm happy to hear your comments. And since you'll probably be seeing this on Tuesday, I will say that I'm giving a talk tonight, Tuesday, November 13th, at Chabad of the East Valley with Elisheva Dorfman, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist specializing in eating disorders. And we're going to be talking about raising healthy kids. So some of this that we're talking about, as well as some other stuff. So feel free to join me. Come join me. That's going to be amazing. And Toddler Test Kitchen is coming up on November 27th at the Farm South Mountain. I'm really excited for the new location. It's beautiful. Bring some bug spray. And join me next week for Nap Time Nutrition on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Arizona time. And since all you crazies changed your clocks, that is now 3 p.m. on the East Coast and noon on the West Coast. And Rosemma can comment on what time it is in New Zealand, but I think it's Wednesday morning at 9. So thank you so much for joining me, Atara. It was wonderful having you.
It's a pleasure. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.